In this video we'll be taking a look at Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation, which forms part of Component 1 Section B for the Eduqas A-Level Media Studies specification. As it's part of Section B, the focus will be primarily on audiences and industries, but there'll be a brief look at representation given the nature of the game and the importance of representations in marketing the game. Just a little bit of context. Assassin's Creed is developed by Ubisoft, one of the world's biggest game developers, and published by Ubisoft 2, released in 2012. It was a simultaneous release alongside Assassin's Creed 3, and they make up the 5th and 6th installments of the Assassin's Creed franchise, which is one of the biggest selling and most commercially successful game franchises of all time. Some stats which might be useful when considering this game in its full context. 86% of 16 to 69-year-olds have played a console or mobile game in the last year, and that data is from 2020. There is now roughly a 50-50 split, and when you consider mobile gaming, actually that split starts to fall in the balance of female gamers, and that's important because Assassin's Creed 3 was released on a handheld console. 54% of gamers say they play most days, and the average age of a European gamer is 31. This is all important because we need to break the stereotype and get away from the stereotype of a gamer as being an 18-year-old or a teenage boy sat in his bedroom on a console. The gaming world has changed significantly in the last 10 to 20 years, and the profile of a gamer as a result is much more diverse than it once used to be. And that's important when considering the purpose and the potential audience for Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation. The game itself was released as a single platform release on the PS Vita. A couple of years later it was released again on a multi-platform release on a variety of platforms such as Xbox and PlayStation and PC. But originally it was a single platform release on the Vita. The Vita was PlayStation's new handheld device to try and get into that market. It offered accessibility and convenience, part of the demands of the modern gamer, as well as gaming on the move. It had Wi-Fi functionality, and there was synergy in the co-promotion of the console, the platform, and the game itself, both being released at the same time. It's significant that this game was released on the Vita because, as I've said before, this is a game which is trying to tap into that increasing market of female gamers, and statistics show that women are much more likely to play games on a handheld device. As I mentioned previously, it was a simultaneous release alongside Assassin's Creed 3. The importance of that is that both games become part of the existing narrative for Assassin's Creed. This is a chronological franchise that goes through time. Liberation takes place in New Orleans between 1765 and 1777, whilst Assassin's Creed 3 takes place between 1754 and 1783. The importance of this simultaneous release is to try and appeal to, by releasing a new game which breaks with many of the conventions, they release it alongside a more conventional game in order to appeal to the large existing audience and fans of the franchise. In terms of its conventionality, Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation has many of the conventions of the genre and the franchise. It's an assassin versus Templars narrative. It's also a revenge narrative, which it has in common with all the other games in the franchise. It's a single player format. Statistics also show that female gamers are much more likely to play single player games rather than multiplayer. It becomes therefore as part of the historical chronology of the franchise. So if you want to maintain that chronology through time, you need to buy the game. The one thing that is not conventional about this game, and that is significant, is that this is a female protagonist, and it is the only female protagonist in the entire franchise. And that female protagonist is Aveline de Grandpré. as well as being a woman and breaking ground in that sense, she is also mixed race. She's of French and African descent, ancestors who were slaves. If we have a look at her costume, it's androgynous in so many ways. There are hints to her femininity, but otherwise it is typical of the costumes of the franchise, the kind of hidden face, the armoured clothing, the weaponry is very much of its time and typical of the game. So she fits the typical assassin whilst having subtle hints to her femininity and highlighting her difference. She has all the powers and moves of the male assassins. There is nothing in terms of the gameplay to differentiate her from the other assassins. We're going to have a look now at how Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation targets its audience. As I've said before, this is a game which breaks with convention and is therefore trying to target definitely existing fans of the franchise and existing gamers, but also trying to tap into that growing female market. And it becomes therefore a game about breaking stereotypes, a game about female liberation and the liberation of race as well. At the opening of the trailer, we get a bit of dialogue which is, "I told you to keep your place," perhaps a hint to the way in which people of ethnicity and women have been repressed over time. But at the same time, Aveline jumps off a building in an act of freedom and liberation. And shortly following that, there's discussion about this sense of repression, and she says, "And so I fight." And at that moment, she slays one of her male adversaries. And so this is a sort of moment of female empowerment. Then we get this really intriguing shot of Aveline stood next to Connor Kenway, who is the assassin from Assassin's Creed 3 that was released alongside this game, and she says, "I stand with those who stand with me." This is a quote and a screenshot which is clearly trying to create a feeling of unity and loyalty amongst existing fans of the genre. They are just reminding those existing fans that they're not leaving them behind in the release of this game. They're trying to bring them along for the ride, as well as targeting a new and more diverse audience. And we see here the way in which Aveline not only overcomes the repression of femininity, but also starts to exploit it. She says, "I lure my prey through the guise of a lady," and she dances with this gentleman now and then slays him. So she is exploiting her femininity and turning it into a weapon of power. Similarly, she turns her race and her ancestry into a tool of power as well. She refuses to be repressed by her history. "I escaped unnoticed through the veil of a slave." And then the trailer finishes, the action shots finish with, "I am Aveline de Grandpré and I am an assassin." This is a game very much about female identity, but it also reminds us that she is also an assassin and part of the franchise, appealing not only to women seeking a sense of empowerment, but also to existing fans of the franchise. Following the action, we get the promotion screen here, trying to build up a sense of anticipation about the release of the Vita and the release of the game itself. And there's an offer to pre-order now for October the 30th. You'll see a hint to the website there. Assassin's Creed has its own website and Liberation had its own page. There is a nod to Ubisoft, and of course Ubisoft, being one of the world's biggest game developers, gives the game credibility. And there's the exclusivity suggested by only on PlayStation. And then the final screen of the trailer is trying to appeal to those super fans of the franchise, those who have followed it since the beginning, with the go behind the scenes of Assassin's Creed 3. There's the sense of synergy continued with learn how to use the unique Vita features, and you'll notice at the bottom the hashtag #AC3 join the conversation. This is a game which is trying to generate conversation through its difference and through its anti-conventional features, and so the hashtag is designed to create conversation and to create a movement of people who are uniting behind the game's purpose. Now I'm going to move on and have a quick look at regulation. The gaming industry in the UK is regulated by the Video Standards Council. Games themselves are rated using the European system of PEGI, and Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation was given a PEGI rating of 18 because it contains strong language and violence towards humans. There are many issues and difficulties with regulation in the UK and globally in terms of the gaming industry. The age rating is of course only a point of purchase rating. It doesn't stop people playing the game once it's been purchased. We also have the rise of digitally convergent platforms such as YouTube, Twitch. What happens here is that the games can actually be played and videoed on YouTube. So even if somebody can't buy the game, they can still watch the gameplay on YouTube. So there's a risk there that the violence of those games will start to impact people who are younger. The danger being, of course, that YouTube and Twitch are largely unregulated spaces. They're certainly regulated outside of the remit of the gaming industry. So the gaming industry has no real control over what is displayed on YouTube and Twitch and other streaming platforms. And so that becomes a danger for them in terms of regulation. There is of course an argument that watching the game isn't as dangerous as playing it. When we come to have a think about Bandura in a moment, he would argue that it's the playing of the game really that is more dangerous in terms of copyable behaviour. We of course have online gameplay and multiplayer functions, and we have the anonymity of the online space. You don't know who you're playing with. That can become a danger, which we'll look at in a moment. And we have online gaming becoming increasingly a social space where you can interact with other individuals, and that becomes an unregulated space too. In terms of other dangers, it's not just gameplay. We've considered in our lessons the theory of the media effects theory of Albert Bandura, who suggests that playing violent video games or watching violent conduct might lead to the copying of that violent and aggressive behaviour in the individual. Bandura argues that particularly when you are rewarded for violence, you are much more likely to reenact it. And this is where gaming comes in, because particularly in a game like Assassin's Creed 3, the users are rewarded for being violent, and therefore Bandura would suggest that they're much more likely to reenact and copy that behaviour. It's important to note that Bandura's theory has its flaws and has been largely discredited by lots of other theories that have come along since. But it's worth considering his theory because he is a set theorist, even if you want to challenge it. I've mentioned the issue of online anonymity, and what that can lead to is problems such as grooming, and there have been lots of high-profile incidents where young gamers have been groomed by adults pretending to be teenagers online in the gaming world, which has led to tragic consequences. And then we also have the threat of in-game purchases, and this is a major problem for the gaming industry. With the increased Wi-Fi capability of online gaming, and that's relevant to the Vita, there's the opportunity for gamers to purchase in-game, so things like skins and costumes and weapons and level upgrades. The problem with that is that it then falls to the parents to control that, and ultimately regulation becomes the responsibility of the user and the parent. They need to put the correct protections in place to prevent these dangers from occurring. The gaming industry is really only regulated by the age rating, and that only goes so far in terms of its regulatory capability. And that brings us on to Livingstone and Lunt, who argue that, I'm going to go to the second strand here, where it says that the traditional approaches to regulation have been placed at risk by the rise of digitally convergent media technologies. And we've mentioned YouTube and Twitch already. The fact that you can watch the gameplay outside of the regulated space of the gaming world is clearly a danger. And Livingstone and Lunt make the point that regulation cannot and struggles to keep pace with the changes in technology. The problem with regulation is it has to go through government and become legislation. That takes months and sometimes years. And in that time period, technology has moved on even further. And so by the time that regulation is passed, it's no longer relevant or useful. And so Livingstone and Lunt suggests that regulation is struggling to keep up with the rise in technology. Of course, the power of these super game developers such as Ubisoft is also an issue, because they can heavily influence the regulators. The regulators can't really have to give them some leeway in order to allow them to operate, and so the power of those dominant companies can become a problem in terms of legislation and regulation. Let's have a think about Hesmondhalgh then. Hesmondhalgh's argument is that companies try to minimise risk and maximise audiences through vertical and horizontal integration, and by formatting their cultural products, e.g. through the use of stars, genres and serials. Now we can clearly see that with Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation they have attempted to do that. There is some vertical integration through the synergy created with PlayStation Vita and the game. There is also the synergy created by the simultaneous release of Assassin's Creed 3, and so they formatted the release of the genre in such a way that it serves to minimise risk and maximise audiences. They're also tapping into that increasingly female market, so you could say that they're diversifying their audience and increasing it. We could argue, however, that there is an inherent risk in the female protagonist, because they're changing the conventions of the genre, and in changing the conventions of the genre there is a danger that you lose audience members by not meeting those audience demands and expectations. So there's an inherent risk in the female protagonist, but there are lots of other ways in which they seek to minimise risk. And then the final theory we're going to look at here is Curran and Seaton, the idea that the media is controlled by a small number of companies primarily driven by the logic of profit and power. We're going to consider that opening strand of Curran and Seaton's theories. Of course, by releasing this game, Ubisoft are seeking to make additional profit, and we've looked at the ways in which they're trying to maximise their audience and maximise their revenue. But we could also argue that there is a different purpose to this game, that they are not driven exclusively by profit and power, but instead they are driven by sociological and societal change. They're seeking to address the outdated representation of women in the gaming industry, for example, that sort of overly sexualized female protagonist who was there for the male gaze. They're looking to address that. They're also looking to expand the female audience in this genre of gaming, and so to change the expectation of audience as well. So yes, they're certainly driven by profit and power, but there is also the possibility to argue that they are driven by sociological and societal change. I hope that's been a useful look at Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation, and that should give you the knowledge and skills you need to attack any particular question you might get in Component 1 Section B.